David Letterman's pen fell from his hand and rolled off the desk onto the floor. Paul Shaffer stopped playing mid. The band went silent. 200 people in Studio 6A held their breath. Sitting across from Dave was Katharine Hepburn, four-time Academy Award winner, Hollywood's most fiercely independent woman, the actress who'd never played by anyone's rule. And right now, on this cold February night in 1985, at 77 years old, Kate Hepburn was doing something she'd refused to do for 60 years of stardom. She was crying, not movie crying, real, ugly, soul-deep crying. And what she was about to confess would destroy the myth of the woman who needed no one and reveal the devastating price of being Hollywood's most independent star. February 14, 1985, Valentine's Day. Studio 6A at Rockefeller Center, New York City. Late Night with David Letterman was the hottest show on television. The wood-paneled studio glowed under warm tungsten light. The retro desk sat center stage. Paul Shaffer's keyboard gleamed. The Manhattan skyline sparkled through tall windows. David Letterman, 37 years old, sat behind his desk trying to control his nerve. His curly brown hair was characteristically disheveled. His tie hung loose. His hands trembled slightly as he shuffled his blue index card. Tonight terrified. Tonight's guest was legendary for walking out of interview, for destroying journalists who asked the wrong question, for being absolutely uncontrollable. Katharine Hepburn. The booking had seemed impossible. Hepburn didn't do talk shows ever. In 60 years of being the biggest star in Hollywood, she'd done exactly 3 television interviews. She hated the format, hated the superficiality, hated being on display like a trained animal. At 77, she won 4 Oscars, more than any actor in history. She defied every Hollywood convention, worn pants when women weren't allowed to, lived openly with Spencer Tracy for 27 years while he was married to someone else, played complex women who didn't need men to complete. But 2 weeks ago, she called the show herself, said she wanted to talk to Dave, just him, one night, no pre-interview, no restrict, but also no guarantees. She wouldn't walk off if she didn't like how things were going. The monologue went perfect. Dave was sharp but gentle, sensing the tightrope he was walking. The audience was electric with anticipation. Paul's band was flawless. Then came the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dave said, genuine awe in his voice, "my next guest is the greatest actress in the history of American cinema. She's won 4 Academy Awards. She's made over 50 films. She's never followed anyone's rule but her own. And I'm frankly terrified. Please welcome Miss Katharine Hepburn." The audience exploded. This was royal. This was seeing a living legend who never appeared anywhere. Paul's band played something elegant and understated. The curtain pulled back, and Katharine Hepburn walked out. She moved with that distinctive Hepburn stride, confident, athletic, completely her own. She wore black pants, a white turtleneck, and a burgundy blazer. No dress, no makeup beyond the minimum. Her hair was silver white, pulled back simply. Her face was deeply lined, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with youth. Those incredible cheekbones, those piercing blue eyes that had dominated the screen for 6 decades. Dave stood, approached carefully. Hepburn took his hand firmly, looked him directly in the eye, and smiled. A real smile, not a performance. She sat in the guest chair with perfect posture, crossed her leg, folded her hand. A woman completely comfortable in her own skin. "Miss Hepburn, I can't believe you're actually here," Dave said. "Call me Kate, and neither can I. I've avoided this nonsense for 60 years. That voice clipped, aristocratic, unmistakably Hepburn. The audience laughed, delighted. They talked about her early film, about working with Cary Grant and Spencer Tracy, about defying studio boss. Hepburn answered with wit and intelligence, never boring, always sharp. This was going remarkably well. Then Dave asked a simple question that changed everything. "Kate, you've been called Hollywood's most independent woman. You've never married. You've never followed conventional rules. What made you so determined to be different?" Something shifted in Hepburn's face. The performance mask slipped. What appeared underneath was raw and unexpected. "Can I tell you something, David?" Her voice was different now. Quiet, vulnerable. "Of course." Hepburn looked at the audience, then back at Dave. Her hand, which had been perfectly still, began to tremble slightly, the essential tremor that had plagued her for years. "I wasn't trying to be different. I was trying to survive." What Katharine Hepburn said next would shatter 60 years of carefully constructed mythology. "Everyone thinks I chose independence," Hepburn continued, her voice steady but something breaking underneath. "They think I was this fearless woman who didn't need anyone, who wore pants because I was making a feminist statement, who refused to marry because I was above such conventional arrangements." She paused, her jaw tight. "But that's not true. None of it's true." The studio went quiet. Dave leaned forward, sensing something enormous about to surface. "I wore pants because I hated my legs," Hepburn said simply. "I thought they were too thin, too masculine. Studio heads told me I'd never be a star because I didn't look like a woman. So I covered, and everyone thought I was being revolutionary. I was just being insecure." A nervous laugh rippled through the audience, but it died quick. "And married," Hepburn continued, her voice thickened. "Everyone thinks I was too independent for marriage, too unconventional, too strong to need a man." She looked directly at Dave with those extraordinary eyes, now filling with tears. "I was asked to marry by the only man I ever truly loved. And I said no. Not because I was independent, because I was terrified. The studio was dead silent now. Paul Schaefer's hands hovered over the keyboard, not daring to make a sound. His name was Howard Hughes, Hepburn said. Before Spencer, before everything. 1936. I was 29 years old. We'd been together for 2 years. He was brilliant, impossible, magnificent, and he asked me to marry him. Tears started coming down her face. Real tears. Katharine Hepburn, who'd never shown vulnerability in 60 years of public life, was crying on national television. And I said no, because my mother told me that marriage was a prison for women, that independence was the only thing that mattered, that I'd lose myself if I became someone's wife. Her voice broke completely. So I said no, and he married someone else a year later, and I spent the next 49 years wondering if I'd made the worst mistake of my life. Dave was frozen. This wasn't the interview anyone expected. This was confession. Kate, he said gently, you were with Spencer Tracy for 27 years. Surely Spencer was married. Hepburn interrupted sharply. To a Catholic woman who wouldn't divorce him. So I got to be his mistress, his secret, the woman he visited between films and obligation. And I told myself it was enough, that I was independent, that I'd chosen. She wiped her face with her hand, careless of the camera. But I didn't choose it. I got it because I'd already chosen wrong. Because I'd said no to the man who actually wanted to marry me, to make me his wife, to give me everything. The audience was stunned. Women were crying. Men were crying. This icon of strength was falling apart in front of them. You know what the worst part is? Hepburn asked, not expecting an answer. Everyone celebrates me. Katharine Hepburn, the independent woman, the one who didn't need a man. And I smile and accept their admiration. But inside, I'm screaming, because I did need some. I needed Howard. And I sent him away because I was afraid. And then Katharine Hepburn did something that would haunt everyone watching. Hepburn reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out an envelope, yellowed with age. Fragile. Howard Hughes died in 1976, 9 years ago. He was alone, paranoid, broken. Everything people say about him is true. He went mad at the end. She held up the envelope with trembling hands. But before he died, before the madness took him completely, he wrote me a letter. His lawyer delivered it after the funeral. I've never opened. In 9 years, I've carried it with me every day, and I've never had the courage to open. The studio was absolutely silent. The tension was suffocating. Can I open it now? Hepburn asked, looking at Dave. On your show? With all these people watching? Because I think if I don't do it now, I never will. And I need to know, before I die. I need to know what he wanted to say. Dave's throat was tight. Are you sure? No, Hepburn said honestly, but I'm doing it anyway. Paul began to play. Softly, something gentle and heartbreak, creating space for whatever was coming. Hepburn's hand shook badly as she opened the envelope. The essential tremor made it difficult. Dave started to offer help, but she waved him off with that characteristic independence that was both her strength and her courage. She pulled out a single page, unfolded it carefully, and began to read aloud, her voice breaking with every word. My dearest Kate, they tell me I'm dying. They tell me the mind is going. So I'm writing this while I still can, while I still remember you clearly, before the darkness takes everything. Hepburn paused, trying to breathe, trying to continue. I've loved 3 things in my life: flying, building, and you. I lost flying when my body failed. I lost building when my mind began to fracture. But I lost you long before that. I lost you in 1936 when you said no. She was openly sobbing now, but she kept reading. I want you to know I understand why you said no. Your mother, your fear, your need to be your own person. I understood then, and I understand now. But I also want you to know that you were wrong. Hepburn's voice was barely audible. You thought marriage would trap, but Kate, we could have flown together. We could have built empires together. You wouldn't have lost yourself. You would have multiplied yourself. I would have given you everything and asked for nothing except your company. Your brilliant, maddening, extraordinary company. She stopped, unable to continue. The letter shook in her hand. Dave stood up, walked around his desk, and sat beside her chair, not speaking, just present. After a moment, Hepburn found her voice again. I married other women, had other relationships, but none of them were, and I spent 40 years building planes and companies and a fort, and none of it meant anything because I was building it alone. You were supposed to be there. You were supposed to see it. You were supposed to be impressed and delighted and driving me crazy with your opinions about everything. She looked up at Dave, then at the camera, tears streaming. The letter ends. I forgive you for saying no. I understand, but I want you to forgive yourself too, because I know you, Kate. I know you've been punishing yourself for 40 years, and I don't want that. I want you to know that you were loved, complete, unconditional, even when you said no, especially when you said no. You were always loved, always. Howard. Hepburn folded the letter carefully, put it back in the envelope, held it against her chest, and completely broke down. This woman who terrified studio executive and redefined what a leading lady could be, crying like her heart was was break because it was. What happened in the next 60 seconds would change everything anyone thought about independence. Dave did something remarkable. He took Hepburn's hand and said nothing, just held her hand while she cried, while America watched. While this carefully constructed image of the independent woman shattered completely. After a long moment, Hepburn composed herself slightly, wiped her face, looked at the camera. "I want to tell you all something," she said, her voice raw. "Especially you young women who think independence means being alone, who think strength means not needing anyone." She paused, gathering herself. "I spent 60 years being celebrated for my independence, for not needing a man, for making it on my own, and it's all been a lie. Not because I wasn't independent, I was. Not because I wasn't strong, I am. But because independence isn't the same as isolation, and strength isn't the same as self-sufficiency." Her voice grew strong. "I could have had both. I could have been independent and been Howard's wife. I could have been strong and been loved. But I believe the lie that you have to choose, that you can either be yourself or be with someone. That love means surrender." She looked directly at Dave. "And I chose wrong. I chose the myth of the independent woman over the reality of being a human being who needs connection. And I've spent 60 years being celebrated for the worst decision I ever made." The audience was devastated. This wasn't just Katharine Hepburn's story anymore. This was every woman who'd been told that needing someone meant, every person who'd chosen career over love and wondered if they'd made a mistake. "I'm not saying everyone should marry," Hepburn continued. "I'm not saying independence is wrong. I'm saying that I was afraid, and I called my fear independence, and everyone believed me, including me." She looked at the letter in her lap. "Howard's been dead 9 I've been alone my whole life. I've won 4 Oscars, made 50 films, changed Hollywood, and none of it mattered as much as that one word I should have said in 936. Yes?" Dave asked quietly. "Yes," Hepburn whispered. "Just yes. That's all it would have taken. One word, and everything would have been different." Paul played them out gently. The audience applauded, but it wasn't celebration. It was grief. It was recognition. It was the sound of people witnessing something sacred and terrible. Dave walked Hepburn to the curtain. Before she left, she turned back to the camera one more time. "If there's someone you love," she said, "someone who's asked you to choose them, to build a life with them, don't be like me. Don't let fear disguise itself as independence. Say yes while you still can, before 40 years pass, and all you have left is a letter you were too afraid to open." She walked off stage, moving slowly, looking suddenly very old. And what happened after that night would transform Katharine Hepburn's final year. NBC executives didn't know what to do with the footage. Katharine Hepburn had just destroyed her own carefully crafted image on national television. They debated not airing, but Hepburn called him herself. "Air it," she said, "all of it, or I'll never work in Hollywood again, and I'll make sure everyone knows why." They aired it once, and never again. But that once was enough. Letters poured in, thousands of from women who'd chosen career over love, from men who'd been rejected by women afraid to need, from people who'd spent decades being celebrated for choices they regretted. Katharine Hepburn answered as many as she could in her own handwriting, telling them what she'd learned too late, that independence and love aren't that you can be strong and still need some, that fear doesn't become noble just because you call it something else. She lived 6 more years, and in those 6 years, she changed, softened, became more honest and stopped pretending that her choices had all been right. In her final interview, 3 months before she died in 2003 at age 96, she was asked about that night on Letterman. "It was the most important thing I ever did," she said without hesitation. "More important than any film, any Oscar, any role." "Why?" the interviewer asked. "Because I finally told the truth. Not the myth, not the legend. The truth. That I was human. That I made mistakes. That independence isn't always strength. Sometimes it's just fear with better publicity." She paused. "And because maybe, just maybe, some young woman watched that night and learned what I did. That saying yes to love doesn't make you weak. That needing someone doesn't diminish. That you can be Katharine Hepburn and someone's wife. You don't have to choose." Dave Letterman spoke at her funeral in 2003. He told the story of that night, the letter, the tears, the truth. Katharine Hepburn spent 60 years being celebrated for being alone, Dave said, and in 30 minutes, she taught us that maybe we've been celebrating the wrong thing. Maybe independence isn't always something to admire. Maybe sometimes it's just loneliness with better press. He paused, emotional. She showed us that even the strongest people need connect, that even the most independent souls want to be chosen, and that the bravest thing she ever did wasn't wearing pants or defying studio heads or winning 4 Oscars. It was opening that letter on television and admitting she'd been wrong. But here's what almost nobody knows. Here's the rest of the story. After that show aired, Dave received a letter from Howard Hughes' nephew. It included photographs. Howard and Kate in 1935, young, beautiful, completely in love, and a note. Uncle Howard never stopped loving. Even at the end, when he couldn't remember his own name, he remembered Kate. He'd ask for, look for her. The day before he died, he said, "Tell Kate I forgive her. Tell her it wasn't her fault. Tell her I loved her until the very end." Dave sent the photos and note to Hepburn. She called him, crying. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for giving me the courage to open that letter. Thank you for letting me be honest. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to tell the truth." 2 weeks before Hepburn died, she asked to be buried with 2 things: her 4 Oscar statues and Howard Hughes' letter. Her family honored that request. Somewhere in a cemetery in Connecticut, Katharine Hepburn rests with her achievements and her regret. The things she won and the things she lost. The myth she created and the truth she finally told. The legacy of that night isn't about Hollywood or acting or independence. It's about the lies we tell ourselves to justify our fear. About calling isolation strength and loneliness choice. About spending 60 years being celebrated for something that hurt us. Katharine Hepburn was the greatest actress of her generation. But that night on Letterman, she gave her greatest performance. Being human, being wrong, being honest. And maybe that's what we all need to learn. That it's okay to need people. That saying yes doesn't make you weak. That independence is only valuable if it's a choice, not a defense. Howard Hughes died alone, surrounded by wealth and madness. Katharine Hepburn died alone, surrounded by awards and acclaim. Both of them spent their final years wishing they'd said yes in 1936. That's the real story, not the myth of the independent woman, but the truth of the lonely one, and the courage it took to finally admit, even if the admission came 49 years too late.